Chemicals serve a variety of purposes at home or on the job. However, if they are misused, the consequences can be painful, even deadly. Materials can pose a range of hazards, often thought of as either physical hazards or health hazards, although a chemical can be both. Very simply, physical hazards act outside the body to produce a dangerous situation. For example, a flammable or explosive chemical poses physical hazards. Health hazards cause damage such as stomach aches, nausea, and even reproductive damage. But health hazards can be either acute or chronic. Acute health hazards do their damage quickly as a result of short-term exposure, such as respiratory problems caused from a chemical leak. Chronic health hazards occur gradually over time. For example, carcinogens and reproductive toxins are chronic health hazards. On the road, you would never deliberately enter the wrong way. And in your workplace, you would never intentionally misuse a chemical. That's why you depend on labels to warn you about potential hazards. But what about when labels provide very little information? Or even worse, when labels aren't there? In this real-life situation, these workers had no warning at all. They were in a waste storage area of their plant, emptying a small container of what they thought was silver cyanide into a larger container of silver cyanide waste. Only later did they discover the smaller container held hydrogen peroxide, an oxidizer. As the chemicals were mixed, the drum's internal pressure rose rapidly. And suddenly, the drum burst. The workers were hospitalized for chemical burns and exposure to toxic fumes and smoke. As unfortunate as this incident was, these workers should have known not to mix any chemicals that are not properly labeled. Labels on containers of potentially hazardous material shipped to your workplace will be legible, prominently displayed, and include the following information: the identity of the chemical or chemical name, the appropriate hazard warnings such as flammability and explosive properties, and usually the name and address of the chemical manufacturer, importer, or other responsible party. Never remove a label unless you immediately replace it with another one. Therefore, never leave an unmarked container of a hazardous material unattended. Likewise, if you find an unlabeled container of a material, never assume it's harmless just because it isn't labeled. Also, for individual stationary process containers, other signs, placards, process sheets, batch tickets, operating procedures, or other written forms may be attached instead of warning labels. Lastly, warning labels won't do their job unless you do yours. Pay attention to them. Just as you wouldn't ignore a stop sign, don't ignore warning labels. Specific exposure limits that have been established for your safety are permissible exposure limit, or PEL, threshold limit value, or TLV, and short-term exposure limit, or STEL. The PEL and the TLV are maximum concentrations of the substance that you can safely be exposed to when averaged over an 8-hour workday. The short-term exposure limit, or STEL, is an acceptable concentration that you can safely be exposed to measured over a 15-minute period. Sometimes warning signs just aren't enough. You need more detailed information. Your employer will provide material safety data sheets, MSDSs, for every hazardous chemical you work with. You'll find just about everything you could possibly want to know about the safe handling of a material in an MSDS. But trying to use MSDSs regularly can often be frustrating. You can easily remember the information in the MSDS by grouping it into 4 main categories: product information, exposure situations, hazard prevention and protection, and other specific information. Your organization's MSDS may not follow this same order, but the principles for using the MSDS are the same. Basic information about the material, such as its name, the name, address, and telephone number of the manufacturer, and the preparation date or date of the last revision, can be found in the beginning of an MSDS. Keep in mind the chemical name will be the same as the one on the label, although other names may also be listed. Usually, emergency telephone numbers are listed as well. Potential physical and health hazards of a material will be found in the beginning of an MSDS. For example, if a material is flammable, corrosive, or toxic, you will know by reading the MSDS. How these hazards can enter your body and how they will affect your health will be written here as well. For example, the primary routes of entry for this industrial cleaner are inhalation and skin and eye exposure. If exposed to this chemical, long-term health effects are not likely, but acute health effects are, such as reddening and irritation. In the event of an accidental exposure, first aid and firefighting measures are listed, as well as how to respond to a spill or leak. For example, if this industrial cleaner were spilled on the skin or in the eyes, the first aid section says to immediately begin decontamination with running water. Accidental release measures for spills or leaks are listed as well. The MSDS describes how to clean up the hazardous material. It is mainly designed for those trained in responding to emergency spills. Instructions on how to safely handle and store materials can be found in the MSDS. Following these instructions will minimize your direct contact with the material, reduce fire hazards or other reactions, and prevent release of the material. Conditions to avoid when storing chemicals, like excessive heat, direct sunlight, or vibration, will be covered as well. Other safe practices described include engineering controls, such as ventilation, and personal protective equipment, or PPE. For example, while handling hydrochloric acid during routine use, it is advised to wear splash goggles or safety glasses and rubber gloves. You'll also find the physical and chemical properties of a material, such as its appearance, evaporation rate, and melting and boiling points. By knowing the physical and chemical properties, you'll be better able to protect yourself. Other important characteristics listed include whether the material is stable or unstable, conditions and other materials that can cause dangerous reactions with it, and hazardous substances that may be released with decomposition of the material. Other specific information about a material, including toxicological, ecological, disposal, transportation, and regulatory information, is provided. This information is typically needed by specialists, such as emergency responders, physicians, or toxicologists. Although the MSDS is lengthy, it's fairly easy to remember, especially if you think of the four main categories: product information, exposure situations, hazard prevention and protection, and other specific information. An MSDS is like a roadmap. It shows you an overall view and includes precise markings, so you can get to where you're going easily and safely. For everyone's safety, look at the MSDS first, before handling a chemical. You have the right to know the hazards around you. If you're ever unsure about a chemical, ask your supervisor. It's similar to being lost. You refer to a map or ask someone for directions. By reading the warning labels, understanding MSDSs, and applying the training your employer provides, you will be on the road to safety.